The second she said the word compersion, the high-pitched ringing in my left ear started, instantly drowning out the low, mechanical hum of the refrigerator. She was sitting across from me at the custom walnut dining table I built with my own hands, swirling a cheap glass of Pinot Noir, looking at me with this heavily rehearsed, wide-eyed expression of deep spiritual enlightenment. "It's about evolving, David," she whispered, leaning forward just enough so the neckline of her silk blouse draped lower. "It's about redefining what we mean to each other, expanding our capacity for love without possession." My jaw locked so violently the muscles on the sides of my neck seized into tight, agonizing knots. I just kept staring at her mouth while she lied to my face. The glossy sheen on her lower lip. The way she breathed out the sterile therapy buzzwords she'd obviously spent the last 3 weeks memorizing from some garbage daytime podcast. I'm 42 years old. I'm a commercial architect. My entire professional existence is built on calculating structural integrity, identifying microscopic stress fractures, and knowing the exact, mathematical second a concrete foundation is going to fail. You do something like that for 20 years, and it permanently rewires your brain. You look at a marriage the exact same way. 9 years. 9 years of filing joint tax returns, splitting the mortgage, picking out the precise shade of slate gray for the guest bathroom, and suddenly, the floorboards were turning to dust underneath my boots. Not with an explosive crash, but with a quiet, polite, incredibly toxic conversation over a plate of lemon rosemary chicken she had spent 2 hours roasting purely to soften me up. The performance artist at work. "I just feel like we're stagnating," she continued, her voice taking on that soft, breathy, weaponized cadence of a victim. She reached across the polished wood. Her manicured fingers brushed the back of my hand. My stomach physically turned over. Acid burned the back of my throat, thick and metallic. I didn't pull away. I forced my hand to stay perfectly, rigidly still against the cold table. "Don't you want us to grow? To explore our individual autonomy?" She wasn't talking about theory. I knew it right then, feeling the blood draining from my face. My eyes drifted past her shoulder to the kitchen island. Her phone was sitting there, face down, dead center on the marble countertop. Notifications completely silenced. It had been resting face down every single evening for the last 3 weeks. The scattered pieces of her recent behavior violently clicked into place, locking together like cold steel joints in my mind. She didn't want an open marriage to find herself. She already found someone. She already crossed the line. She just wanted the retroactive hall pass to scrub the guilt and keep her comfortable lifestyle. She wanted me to finance her midlife crisis while I sat on the couch paying the electric bill. Most guys, I guess they'd throw the wine glass against the drywall. They'd scream until their vocal cords bled, demand to see the phone, beg her to go to marriage counseling. I didn't. I couldn't. The ringing in my ear just stopped. It snapped off, leaving this absolute, freezing, clinical void in my chest. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I took vows with was entirely gone, replaced by a calculating stranger wearing her skin, trying to legally sanction her own infidelity. "So," I said. My voice was shockingly level. It sounded hollow, like it was coming from a different room. "You want to open the marriage. You want us to date other people. Only if you're comfortable with it," she countered quickly, her eyes widening with a sickening display of fake empathy. "It's a two-way street, David. We both get to experience it. We both get to be free." She didn't mean a single word of that last part. I could see the tiny, almost invisible, arrogant smirk pulling at the left corner of her mouth. The sheer audacity of it. She looked at me, 42, chronically exhausted from 60-hour weeks managing hostile contractors, thick calluses on my palms, gray creeping heavily into my temples, and she calculated that I was entirely harmless. She assumed I'd just swallow the humiliation, that I wouldn't even try to utilize the rules she was setting up. "Okay," I said, just like that. One flat word. Her silver fork stopped halfway to her mouth. A heavy drop of gravy fell onto the porcelain plate with a wet tap. "Okay," she echoed, her voice actually hitching in her throat. Her rehearsed script clearly didn't account for immediate, zero-friction surrender. "Yeah," I nodded, picking up my water glass. The icy condensation chilled my fingertips, grounding me in the physical reality of the dining room. "If that's what you need for us to evolve, I'm open to it. Let's do it." The shift in her posture was instantaneous and disgusting. The rigid tension melted completely out of her shoulders. She let out this long, dramatic sigh of relief, sinking back into her chair. "Oh, David," she breathed, a genuine smile finally breaking through the fake therapy mask. "I knew you'd understand. I knew you were secure enough for this." She took a long, triumphant sip of her wine. She started talking rapidly about ground rules, about managing jealousy, and maintaining absolute honesty. I let her talk. I just watched the pulse beating steadily in her neck, matching the rhythm of the garbage pouring out of her mouth. I took a bite of the chicken. It tasted like sawdust and wet cardboard, but I chewed it methodically, forcing my jaw to work, and swallowed. I didn't tell her that my mind was already pulling the blueprints of our financial life, identifying every joint account, every shared asset, every equity line of credit. I was going to let her have her open marriage. After dinner, she excused herself to take a shower, practically skipping down the hallway. I stayed at the table in the dark. I heard the bathroom door click shut, the lock engage, and the water turn on. And then, faintly, beneath the rush of the pipes, I heard the rapid, unmistakable cadence of her thumbs tapping heavily on a glass screen, giving him the green light. She thought she had just flawlessly manipulated a free pass out of a boring husband. She had no idea that tomorrow morning, while she was at work, I was pulling the raw MAC address logs from our home network router. The heavy scent of vanilla and chemical hairspray hung thick in our bedroom air, coating the back of my throat. She was standing in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the straps of a black slip dress I hadn't seen in at least 3 years. Her eyes were bright, almost feverish, darting to her phone every 10 seconds where it sat face up on the vanity. The notifications were back on, now that she had my blessing. "You're sure you're okay with this, David?" she asked, smoothing her hands down her sides. She turned to look at me, pasting on that same counterfeit expression of deep concern. "I mean, we can pause the experiment if you're feeling insecure. Communication is the bedrock of this journey." My jaw muscles tightened so hard a dull ache radiated up into my temples. I was leaning against the doorframe, my arms crossed over my faded work shirt, watching her operate. It was genuinely terrifying how easily she wore the skin of a caring wife while walking out the door to sleep with another man. "I'm fine," I said. My voice was completely flat, a dead-level baseline. "Have a good time exploring." I even reached out and held her wool coat open for her. I felt the heat radiating off her bare shoulders as she slipped her arms into the sleeves. She turned and kissed my cheek, a quick, dry peck that smelled like mint gum and lies. The deadbolt clicked shut heavily behind her. I stood in the foyer, listening to the muffled crunch of her tires backing out of the driveway. The house settled into a massive, suffocating silence. I didn't pace the hardwood floors. I walked straight into my home office, booted up my dual monitors, and went to work. It was time to look at the structural foundation. I logged into the admin dashboard of our home Wi-Fi network. As an architect, I deal in data. Blueprints don't lie. Load-bearing calculations don't have emotions. And neither do MAC addresses. It took me exactly 12 minutes to pull the historical connection logs. I exported the raw data and started filtering. There it was. An unrecognized device. An iPhone 14, named J-Bone, bouncing onto our network every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the last 4 months. Right around the time she supposedly had her bi-weekly virtual therapy sessions with her headset on in the locked spare bedroom. I cross-referenced the connection timestamps with our digital security camera logs. The driveway camera mysteriously went offline during those exact windows. Every single time. The cold, absolute void expanded in my chest, freezing over any remaining pocket of grief. She wasn't evolving. She was just bored, sloppy, and hiding a guy named J-Bone in my house while I was on construction sites. I printed the spreadsheet. For clean, crisp pages of undeniable mathematical proof. I slid them into a manila folder and locked it in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Then, I walked back into the master bedroom. I bypassed the pile of dirty work jeans and heavy steel-toe boots I usually wore. I reached into the far back corner of the closet and pulled out the protective garment bag, holding my charcoal gray tailored suit. I hadn't worn it since a corporate gala 3 years ago. I brushed a thin layer of dust off the plastic shoulder. Taking off my work clothes felt like shedding a heavy, exhausted skin. I took a freezing cold shower, letting the ice water shock the numbness out of my limbs. I shaved with absolute precision. When I buttoned the crisp white dress shirt and tightened the silk tie, I looked at myself in the same mirror she had just used. I didn't look like the tired, easily manipulated husband she thought she left behind. I looked sharp, dangerous, awake. I grabbed my keys and drove downtown to a high-end, dimly lit cocktail lounge on the top floor of a boutique hotel. The air smelled like expensive leather and old money. I sat at the mahogany bar, ordered a glass of Scotch neat, and just absorbed the environment. The clinking of heavy ice, the low jazz, the murmur of conversations. I wasn't there to cheat. I was there to fundamentally alter the asymmetrical dynamic she thought she controlled. I spent an hour talking to a commercial real estate broker named Sarah, a sharp, intelligent woman in a green dress who actually held eye contact and asked about my blueprints. I didn't ask for her number. I just needed to remember what it felt like to be seen as a man, not a compliant bank account. I paid my tab with cash, leaving a heavy tip. I drove home slowly, the city lights reflecting off the hood of my truck. I knew her timeline. She told me she'd be home by midnight, playing the responsible pioneer of our new arrangement. She expected to walk into a dark house, find me asleep in my work clothes, and feel the sickening thrill of pulling one over on me. Instead, I made sure I was not there when she unlocked the front door at 1:45. I was sitting in my truck, parked 3 blocks away in the dark, watching the dashboard clock. She walked into a dead-silent house. She found my side of the bed perfectly made, completely untouched. The heavy, masculine scent of my cedar cologne was still lingering in the hallway air. And my truck was nowhere to be found. She thought she was the only one playing the game. She had absolutely no idea that her trap was already snapping shut. I walked through the front door at 1:15 a.m. on a Wednesday. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked loud enough to echo like a gunshot in the dark foyer. I kicked off my dress shoes, not my scuffed, steel-toe boots, but the polished leather Oxfords I'd spent 20 solid minutes shining that morning. The house was dead quiet, but the air inside felt incredibly thick. Heavy. It felt like standing directly under a compromised steel support beam right before the metal groans and gives way. She was waiting for me in the kitchen, sitting perfectly still at the marble island, wrapped tightly in her white silk robe, a mug of chamomile tea sitting completely cold between her rigid hands. The dim, yellow glow from the stove hood illuminated the deep, dark circles under her eyes. She looked absolutely exhausted, brittle even. The smug, enlightened pioneer of the modern open marriage was completely gone, replaced by a tense, nervous woman white-knuckling a ceramic mug in the middle of the night. I walked right past her, my suit jacket slung casually over my right shoulder, and opened the stainless steel refrigerator. The bright internal bulb cast harsh, unforgiving shadows across her face. "You're out late," she said. Her voice was tight, thin, vibrating with a high frequency, barely contained panic. She tried to force a supportive, loving smile, but the corners of her mouth just violently twitched. Did you have a good time? Exploring?" I pulled a heavy glass bottle of sparkling water from the bottom shelf, unscrewed the metal cap with a sharp twist, and took a long, slow drink. The carbonation burned pleasantly down the back of my dry throat. I could feel the intense heat of her stare burning a hole into the side of my face. She was desperately searching for a crack in my armor, a sign of guilt, a stammering apology, an emotional breakdown. She desperately wanted me to break down and beg her to call the whole experiment off, so she could graciously agree, play the hero, and keep her secret bartender boyfriend on the side. "It was great," I said, setting the cold glass bottle on the granite counter with a soft thud. My voice was an absolute flatline, just polite, clinical, unfeeling detachment. Met a woman named Elena at an architecture exhibit downtown. We had drinks, talked for a few hours. Really good conversation. I let the silence stretch out between us, thick and totally suffocating. The distinct smell of top-shelf gin and city air was definitely clinging to my clothes, and a sleek black matchbook from the hotel lounge was visibly sticking out of my front breast pocket. Nothing physical had happened. I was just buying overpriced drinks and talking about load-bearing concrete for 2 hours, but my wife didn't know that. Information asymmetry, man. It's a beautiful, utterly lethal weapon when you know exactly how to wield it. She swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing in the dim light. "Oh, that's wonderful, David. I'm feeling so much compassion for you right now." The therapy buzzwords sounded like dry ash in her mouth. Her knuckles were bone white against the tea mug. I just gave her a curt, polite nod, grabbed my cold water, and walked down the hallway toward the guest bedroom. I didn't say goodnight. I didn't look back. I just walked in, shut the heavy wooden door, and turned the lock with a solid click. The next morning, the sun was glaring hot through the horizontal blinds in my home office, casting sharp, cage-like lines of light across my mahogany desk. My coffee was black, scalding hot, and tasting exactly like total control. I wasn't pacing the floorboards. I wasn't crying into my hands. Hell, I was sitting straight up in my leather chair, staring at my dual monitors, executing the financial extraction phase. I logged into the portal for our joint checking and savings accounts. The screen glowed bright white, reflecting off my retinas. For 9 years, every single paycheck, every massive quarterly bonus from my commercial architecture firm went straight into that shared digital pool. It funded her lease on the luxury SUV. It funded her overpriced weekend yoga retreats. And lately, it had been directly funding J-Bone the bartender. Not anymore. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the keys clacking loudly and rhythmically in the quiet room. Over the last week, I had quietly set up a private, individual trust through an old college buddy who runs a boutique wealth management firm. It was totally legal, completely insulated, and in my name only. I opened the payroll portal for my firm. With 4 precise, methodical clicks of the mouse, I deleted our joint account routing number. I pasted in the new, individual account data. I hit submit. The green confirmation banner flashed brightly at the top of the screen. Just like that, 80% of our total household income vanished from her reach forever. The financial concrete was poured. The walls were up. I was safe. I took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling a massive, physical weight literally lift off my sternum. The ringing in my ears was entirely gone, replaced by the steady humming of the central air conditioning. I checked the router logs again. J-Bone's iPhone hadn't connected to the home network in 5 straight days. Her little side project was clearly falling apart now that she was terrified by my sudden, unbothered independence. She thought she was running the entire board, but she was playing checkers while I was systematically dismantling the board itself. My phone vibrated violently against the hardwood of the desk. A text from her. *Hey, I think we need to do a check-in dinner tonight. I'm feeling a little disconnected. Let's recalibrate our boundaries. *. I stared at the glowing pixels. The absolute panic wrapped in sterile therapy speak. She was finally realizing the rules applied to both of us, and she was terrified of losing the safety net. She wanted to close the trap back up, secure my bank account, and go back to lying to my face in absolute comfort. Sounds good, I typed back, my thumb hitting the glass screen with cold, mechanical precision. *See you at 7. I locked my phone and slid it into my pocket. She thought we were going to sit down, hold hands, and negotiate our feelings over a plate of pasta. She had absolutely no idea that my leather briefcase, sitting right next to my steel-toe boots by the front door, was already packed tight. It wasn't filled with apologies or emotional compromises. It was filled with freshly stamped bank transfer confirmations, zeroed-out joint statements, and the quiet, undeniable proof of her absolute ruin. I watched a single tear streak through her expensive foundation, pooling right at the edge of her trembling jaw, and all I could think about was the undeniable fact that her bartender boyfriend had stopped returning her texts exactly 72 hours ago. We were sitting at the exact same walnut dining table where she had pitched her little evolution project 3 weeks ago. The house smelled incredibly heavy, choked with the thick scent of roasted garlic and absolute desperation. She had spent the entire afternoon cooking my favorite meal, a massive pan of Parmesan risotto, spooning it onto our plates with this frantic, nervous energy that vibrated right down to her wrists. I just sat there in the dim overhead light. I let the hot steam rise into my face, feeling the familiar, freezing knot tighten right behind my breastbone. The ringing in my ears was a low, steady, mechanical hum. I just don't think this is serving us anymore, David, she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. A masterclass performance. She reached across the polished table, sliding her cold, clammy hand over my knuckles. My skin crawled immediately. The tiny hairs on my forearms stood straight up, a purely biological rejection of her touch, but I forced my hand to stay dead still on the wood. The open marriage experiment. It was a mistake. I thought it would bring us closer, but I'm feeling so unmoored. We need to recalibrate. We need to close the relationship back up. Tonight. I stared at her glossy lips, watching them quiver in the yellow kitchen light. It was almost sad, man. Really. She wasn't unmoored because of some spiritual disconnect between us. She was panicking because the asymmetrical power dynamic had violently inverted. I knew exactly what was happening behind the scenes. I checked the router logs every morning at 5 a.m. with my black coffee. J-Bone's device hadn't pinged our network in a week. I had even seen the unread iMessage notifications stacking up on her lock screen when she carelessly left her phone by the bathroom sink. 6 green bubbles in a row, totally unanswered. Without my paycheck subsidizing her ego, and with her side piece actively ghosting her, the reality of her choices was caving in on her. And worse, she was absolutely terrified of the phantom women I was supposedly seeing. I hadn't touched another woman, but I made sure I came home smelling like high-end steakhouses, heavy cedar, and expensive gin every single night. I slowly pulled my hand out from under hers, reaching for my heavy crystal water glass. The ice clinked sharply against the rim, breaking the heavy silence in the room. "Close it," I asked, keeping my voice utterly flat. A total emotional baseline. Why? I thought we were evolving. I'm finally experiencing that compersion you talked about. Her breath hitched. A sharp, ugly, wet intake of air that caught in the back of her throat. "David, please. I'm telling you I'm hurting. This isn't safe for our foundation anymore. Don't you want to protect what we built?" Protect what we built. I'm a commercial architect, you know? My entire life is built on load-bearing math. When a concrete foundation is compromised by a deep stress fracture, you don't just paint over the cracks. You demolish the structure before the roof collapses on your head. I set the heavy glass down. The icy condensation dripped down the smooth sides, pooling into a small puddle on the dark wood. My jaw locked, so tightly my back teeth groaned. "I think we need to honor the boundary you set," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the hollow quiet of the kitchen. "You sat right in that chair on day one and said we needed autonomy. You said possession wasn't love. I'm just following your blueprints, Sarah. I'm not ready to close it. The arrangement stays exactly as it is." The color violently drained from her face. I mean, she went completely paper white, the blood rushing out of her cheeks so fast her skin looked like chalk. The silver fork in her right hand started shaking so badly it rattled loudly against the edge of her porcelain plate. She couldn't compute the math of the situation. The obedient, exhausted husband was looking right through her, completely immune to the fake tears, entirely unbothered by her practiced emotional manipulation. She had built the trap, tested the spring, and I was just calmly sitting there watching her get her own leg caught in the steel jaws. We can go to counseling," she stammered, her voice dropping into a frantic, breathless whisper. She dropped the fork. It clattered harshly against the table. "Tomorrow. I'll book someone tomorrow morning. A professional. We just need to sit down and do the work, David. We can fix this." Even now, she was trying to twist the narrative to make herself the victim. I picked up my own fork and took a slow, methodical bite of the risotto. It was lukewarm and tasted like wet sand, but I chewed it anyway, maintaining absolute, unbroken, dead-eyed contact with her until she physically had to look away. "Sure," I said quietly, the word completely hollow, dropping into the room like a stone into a dry well. "Book the counselor." She let out a massive, shuddering sigh of relief, her shoulders instantly dropping 2 inches. She actually thought she had just secured a lifeline. She thought she had successfully paused the clock and bought herself enough time to reel me back in. She had absolutely no idea that inside the breast pocket of my suit jacket, hanging perfectly pressed right behind her in the hallway closet, was a fully countersigned, 12-month lease for a luxury penthouse apartment downtown. And the move-in date was exactly 6 days away. The heavy, suffocating smell of melting beeswax and roasted pine nuts hit me the exact second I unlocked the front door. She had spent the entire afternoon staging the perfect, cinematic reconciliation scene. Dim lighting, soft jazz humming from the expensive sound system I had wired myself. The dining room table was set with our wedding china, the heavy, gold-rimmed plates we hadn't touched in 6 solid years. She was standing by the kitchen island, wearing a dark green silk dress, pouring an expensive Cabernet into 2 heavy crystal glasses. She looked up when the deadbolt clicked, pasting on this fragile, hopeful smile that looked completely synthetic under the warm pendant lights. "I made your favorite," she breathed softly, the weaponized therapy speak totally gone, replaced by the desperate, frantic cadence of a woman trying to save her comfortable lifestyle. "I thought we could just be us tonight. No distractions, no outside noise, just connection." My boots felt incredibly heavy on the hardwood floor. I didn't take off my heavy wool coat. I didn't even loosen my silk tie. I just walked straight into the dining room, carrying a thick, legal-sized manila folder under my right arm. The high-pitched ringing in my ears was completely gone. The cold, mechanical void in my chest had hardened into absolute, impenetrable steel. I pulled out my chair. The heavy wooden legs scraped loudly against the floorboards, a sharp, ugly sound that violently shattered the quiet, manufactured intimacy she was trying so hard to build. I sat down. I placed the folder exactly in the dead center of the table, right between the 2 untouched china plates. The thick stack of paper landed with a dull, heavy thud that seemed to echo in the room. "Sit down, Sarah," I said. My voice was just, flat. It sounded like scraping a metal trowel across dry concrete. No anger, no heat, just the absolute baseline of a man who was entirely finished. Her fragile smile instantly shattered. The blood rushed completely out of her face, leaving her skin looking like damp, gray chalk. She slowly lowered the wine bottle to the marble counter, her hand trembling so violently the thick glass clinked sharply against the stone. She walked over, her steps stiff and uncoordinated, and sat down directly across from me. Her eyes were locked completely on the unmarked folder. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice incredibly tight, barely pushing past the constriction in her throat. I flipped the heavy cardstock cover open. The sharp, chemical scent of fresh printer ink drifted up into the warm, garlic-scented air. I slid the first stapled document across the polished walnut table. "This is the MAC address log from our home network router," I said, leaning back in my chair, slowly interlacing my fingers and resting them on my stomach. "It highlights every single time an iPhone 14 registered to a guy named Jay Bone connected to our Wi-Fi while I was on construction sites. Over the last 4 months. Specifically, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon during your scheduled, virtual therapy sessions. The ones you locked the door for." Her mouth fell open. A sharp, ugly gasp tore out of her lungs, like she had just been physically struck in the ribs. She stared at the highlighted rows of raw data, completely paralyzed, her eyes darting frantically over the timestamps. "And this," I continued, my voice never rising a single decibel, sliding the next packet of paper over the smooth wood until it bumped against her water glass. "This is the financial extraction. As of 8 days ago, my direct deposits were permanently rerouted to an individual trust. The joint savings account has been legally divided, and my half was wired out this morning. I didn't touch your money. I just took away your access to mine. David, I can explain," she stammered blindly, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the data logs, trembling uncontrollably. A massive, humiliating tear broke loose and tracked rapidly down her pale cheek, cutting through her expensive makeup. "The open marriage, it was just." I was confused. "We can fix this. Please, let's just talk." My jaw locked, so tight my back teeth sent a dull ache straight up into my temples. I just stared at her. "There was no open marriage," I told her, the words dropping into the room like heavy, freezing stones. "There was never an experiment. You wanted a distraction so you could cheat without feeling guilty. You wanted me to sit on the couch and finance your midlife crisis. So I agreed. I gave you exactly what you asked for. And I used the last 28 days to surgically dismantle your access to my life while you were distracted." I slid the final, thickest document right across the center of the table. It stopped inches from her shaking hands. "That is a petition for dissolution of marriage," I said, my chest rising and falling in a slow, controlled, mathematical rhythm. "It's already filed with the county clerk. The asset separation agreement is attached." You keep the lease on the car. You keep the debt on the car. And you keep J-Bone, assuming he actually texts you back. She completely broke. A jagged, ugly sob ripped out of her chest, her hands flying up to cover her face. She was shaking violently, the deep, suffocating realization of her absolute ruin crashing down on her all at once. She had built a trap, and she had just realized she was locked inside it. Alone. I didn't reach out. I didn't offer a tissue. I just sat there in the heavy silence, watching the structure collapse exactly the way I calculated it would. But I wasn't entirely done. I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit jacket, and looked down at her shaking shoulders. She didn't know about the final, crushing logistical detail I had scheduled for tomorrow morning. 7 o'clock. The heavy, rhythmic rumble of an idling diesel engine vibrated right up through the frozen asphalt and straight into the thick rubber soles of my boots. I stood at the end of the driveway, my hands shoved deep into the canvas pockets of my work jacket, watching the heavy white exhaust plume out of the moving truck's tailpipe. The freezing morning mist was clinging to the bare branches of the oak tree in the front yard. The neighborhood was dead quiet. The two movers were absolute professionals, heavy-set guys in thick gray sweatshirts, moving with silent, mechanical efficiency. The heavy metal ramp hit the back of the aluminum truck bed with a deafening, sharp clang that echoed cleanly across the manicured lawns. I just watched them slide the hand truck under the dark leather reading chair from my home office. The thick nylon ratcheting straps clicked loudly, securing the load. Sarah was standing in the open front doorway. The freezing air was pouring right into the foyer, but she didn't seem to feel it. She was wrapped tightly in that same white silk robe, her arms crossed rigidly over her chest, hugging herself like she was trying to hold her ribs together. She looked entirely hollowed out. Her skin was a dull, ashen gray in the harsh morning light. Her eyes were heavily swollen, ringed with deep, dark, bruised-looking circles from crying all night. The smug, enlightened pioneer of the modern open marriage was completely gone, leaving behind nothing but a terrified woman watching her safety net get loaded into the back of a rental truck. I walked past her, stepping up onto the porch. I didn't brush her shoulder. I didn't make eye contact. The house already felt massive, echoing, and totally dead. The blank squares of unfaded paint on the hallway walls where my architectural blueprints used to hang stared back at me like empty windows. I walked into the kitchen to grab the absolute last box. It was just a small cardboard square sitting on the marble island, holding my drafting compasses, some heavy brass pens, and the thick leather notebooks I used for site visits. She followed me. Her bare feet slapped weakly against the cold tile floors. "David," she croaked. Her voice was just shredded. It sounded like tearing wet paper. You don't have to leave right this second. The counselor. The appointment is at noon. We can still go. We can just sit in the room and talk." My jaw clamped shut. A dull, heavy throb started right at the base of my skull, a physical reaction to the sheer, desperate delusion she was still clinging to. I hoisted the cardboard box into my arms. The rough, dry cardboard scraped harshly against the heavy canvas of my jacket. "Cancel the appointment, Sarah," I said. My voice was just a flat, dead bass line. No anger. No heat. Just the absolute, unvarnished math of the situation. There is nothing left to talk about. The structure is completely condemned. She let out this sharp, pathetic, high-pitched whine. She actually reached out, her trembling fingers grabbing the edge of my jacket sleeve. The physical contact made the muscles in my back snap tight, locking up like a rusted steel beam. "Please," she whispered, the absolute humiliation dripping off every single syllable. "He blocked my number, David. He blocked me on everything. I went to the bar last night, and he told the bouncer to make me leave. I have nothing. I have nobody." I just stared at her hand gripping my sleeve. I stared at it until she realized what she was doing, and slowly, shakingly, pulled her fingers back. "The mortgage payment on this property automatically triggers on the 1st of the month," I told her, my chest rising and falling slowly against the weight of the box. "That is exactly 3 days from now. My income is entirely removed from the joint routing number. You are now the sole financial guarantor of this house. The property tax assessment comes due in 6 weeks. The utility bills pull on the 14th. Without my paycheck subsidizing your life, the math doesn't work for you. It is a structural impossibility." Her breath hitched violently in her throat. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth as the crushing, undeniable reality of the logistics finally slammed into her. "You built this blueprint," I said quietly, adjusting my grip on the box. "You sat right there and told me you needed autonomy. You wanted to evolve. You wanted an open relationship so you could explore. Well, here it is. Total freedom. You're completely unmoored now, just like you asked." I turned away from her and carried the box out the front door. The freezing morning air felt incredible, hitting the sweat on my forehead. I handed the box off to the mover, signed the yellow carbon copy clipboard with a cheap plastic pen, and walked back inside for the final piece of the extraction. The kitchen island. Sitting right there on the polished stone were 3 paperback books about finding your inner truth and redefining modern relationships. The spines were perfectly uncreased. She hadn't even read them. She just bought them for the aesthetic, to use as props in her little performance. I reached deep into the front pocket of my jeans. My rough, calloused fingers brushed against the cold, heavy band of tungsten carbide. I pulled it out. It felt completely weightless in the palm of my hand. 9 years of gravity, 9 years of building a foundation, just gone. Turned to dust. I set the wedding ring down gently on top of the books. The heavy metal made a sharp, clean clink against the glossy cover. She was standing by the stainless steel stove, her face completely buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as jagged, ugly sobs ripped out of her chest. No screaming, no dramatic arguments, just the agonizing, suffocating silence of a woman who outsmarted herself into complete ruin. I didn't say goodbye. I turned my back to her. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heavy boots steady and rhythmic on the wood, and stepped out the front door. I pulled the heavy brass knob shut behind me. The deadbolt clicked with a solid, permanent snap. I climbed up into the high cab of my truck. The worn leather seat was freezing against my back. I shoved the key into the ignition, and the massive engine roared to life, shaking the steering column under my heavy palms. I put the truck in gear. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I backed out of the driveway. I didn't look at the house. I just looked forward, staring straight through the windshield at the clear, empty road ahead, and drove away. Flat, factual acceptance. The board was completely cleared.